Chapter 18 Battle Upon the Mountain. Virginia looked down in terror as the woods around the campsite burned with dark fire. Its smoke was so thick that she could barely see the flames underneath the cloud. The heat waves rose high, hitting her in the face. Slowly, its smoldering inferno began to crawl toward the mountainside where she and Tristan sat. She felt a hand grab her arm. Tristan stood up. "Come, we have to go right now." Carrying his bow in one hand and holding Virginia's arm with his other, he pulled her off the ground and led her down the path around the mountain. "Wait," shouted Virginia. "What about Soaring Eagle and Nathaniel?" Nathaniel was running this way. Soaring Eagle was fighting Darkrai. Virginia's heart froze for a moment. "We can't go on. We have to help him. This isn't Soaring Eagle's first fight against that monster. He will be okay. He's doing this for a reason." "For what reason?" Tristan stopped running and faced Virginia. "For you." Virginia stood confused as the heat waves beat against her face. "What?" "Tristan, I don't understand." Tristan placed his hand on her shoulder. "Darkrai is stronger than most of those wolves. Soaring Eagle is holding him off, giving us a chance to get to the top." "How do you know this?" "Uriah told me," he said, pointing to the dove flying overhead. "But could you see them? Was Soaring Eagle okay?" "Yes, but Uriah explained to me what I was seeing." "A bird told you?" "Don't mock him. He's not just a bird. He's of Oromuti's spirit." He pulled against Virginia's arm. "Hurry. We must continue before it's too late." "But Tristan..." A wild shriek echoed over the cliff's edge beside Tristan and Virginia. They both turned their heads and saw a flaming oak tree crawling with its roots like an octopus over the side of the mountain. It towered over them as it drew closer over the path's edge, shrieking and screeching like a ghost in the night. Fear nearly stopped Virginia's heart as she backed away from the tree. "What the..." Suddenly a root sprung from the ground and wrapped around her leg like a snake. Another root shot up and whipped against Tristan, sending him flying down the pathway. The root around Virginia's ankle lifted out of the ground, revealing the rest of its serpentine form. Virginia screamed as she was pulled closer to the flaming oak. Its branches were blazing with immense fire, fuming at the top with a cloud of dark black smoke. A stream of fire trailed down from its top branches, down its trunk and along the root as it made its way to Virginia's ankle. Virginia kicked at the oak's root and screamed as the fire came only inches from finally touching her skin. A loud shout in a different language sounded up the path. Virginia saw Tristan leaping towards her, his sword drawn in hand. With a mighty swipe, he brought his blade down upon the root that held Virginia's leg. The strong shackle that once held her split in two. The piece wrapped around her leg fell to the ground, wiggling like a worm on the earth. Tristan grabbed Virginia by the arm and pulled her away from the path's edge as the oak tree shrieked even louder. Its flames burned brighter with an exotic rage. It drew one of its fiery branches high in the air, ready to smite them. The sound of a mighty bear roared down the path. Virginia turned her head and saw Nathaniel charging in their direction, wielding his hammer in his powerful arms. A split second later, he drew his weapon back and swung it at his foe, smashing its mallet into the center of the flaming oak. The tree let out a painful cry, like a ghost, as its trunk splintered and cracked in half, its roots loosened from the earth. Then, with a final haunting moan, it slid off the side of the cliff and into the flaming woods below. Nathaniel turned around and picked Virginia up, setting her on her feet. "Come on, Virginia. We have to keep moving. More will come." Virginia looked at all the flames rising slowly over the side of the cliff. "What was that?" "One of the trees that was not on our side," said Tristan. "Like I told you earlier." "But the last one saved my life," said Virginia. "Why did this one try to kill me?" "The fires of Tophet can make even the pure in heart turn sour if they receive them," said Nathaniel. He grabbed Virginia's arm. "Please, Virginia, we will talk more, but now we must run to the stairs of the mountain. It will lead us up to the top where the bridge is." Virginia was more together than Nathaniel had assumed. She picked up her feet and began to run. "Let's go then." Running on either side of Virginia, Nathaniel and Tristan led the way up the path. Every tree down at the campsite was burning wild with fire. The pines, the oaks, the sycamore, the juniper, not one tree was spared from the flames. Branches began to burn off and fall to the ground while entire trees came crashing down in flames. Charles fought against Darkrai gallantly in the arena of fire. Darkrai was quick. He would jump and leap in the air, theatrically flipping and somersaulting while bringing the final rotation of his blade upon Charles. Charles was quicker and not overthrown by Darkrai's schemes. Valiantly, he parried every swipe and stab of Darkrai. He stood his ground firmly. Darkrai jumped high above, raised his sword skybound, and brought it down with a powerful blow, but Charles knelt on one knee, held his blade above his head, and caught the strike before being split in two. Darkrai pressed his blade down upon Charles, but the son of Leaping Bird proved more powerful. He held his stance and refused to weaken. "Give it up, Soaring Eagle," said Darkrai through his teeth. "Take a look around you. It's over. Everything around this mountain will burn down. Just give her to us, and you and your friends may go free. After all, why do you need her? Does your tribe not have the strength to stand against us on your own?" Indignation swelled in the eyes of Charles, more wild and untamable than the fires around him. With all his strength, he stood up on both feet and launched his foe off him. "No, I'm not that strong alone," he said, "but through her in this land, the end of your tribe's ways grow closer and closer to an end. You will not see the kingdom you serve raise its banner over Aletheia. Through Oralmuti, she will usher in the greatest warriors of all time and spearhead the end of your queen's rule." Equipped with a new anger, governing his strength, Darkrai gripped the handle of his sword in both hands and readied himself for his next attack. Charles closed his eyes as a wave of peace fell upon him. He wrapped his arms around himself, knelt on one knee, and began to sing in an unknown tongue. Darkrai's eyes fired open. He cried like a demon in the night and charged toward Charles. He drew his sword back for a blow that would take off the head of his kneeling opponent. Charles spread his arms, threw his head back, and stuck out his chest. A brilliant light exploded from within him, shining brighter than the flames of the forest fire. Two bright wings unfolded from his back and stretched out wide. Darkrai was thrown back by the explosion of light. Charles stood up. His body and eyes glowed brightly. He placed one wing in front of him like a shield and the other over his head like a helmet. He held his sword in both hands and stepped back with his right foot, preparing for Darkrai's next move. Darkrai stood up. His eyes became consumed with a pale green color. His canine teeth had grown out, and his body had begun to bulk up more in mass. Yellow and red sulfur emitted from his nose and mouth, and his breathing was deep and booming. Both warriors stared at each other. No one made a move. The fires of the woods continued to burn around them. "Why?" roared Darkrai. "Why didn't you come with me? You were the only one that I could call brother." "Because Oralmuti gave me a choice, Darkrai," said Charles, "and that choice was simple, the crafts of Skal Golmuteretz or his power. It had nothing to do with you, and you know that. The fire of Tophet would never give me the power I needed to win this war. Look what it did to you. You followed in the footsteps of your father and ancestors. You had a chance to change, to make a difference. Instead, you chose a fire that you knew would never help you, but would leave you smoldering in a pile of ashes." A dark cloud began to permeate around Darkrai. "Oh no, old friend, that's where you are wrong. While the fires are fun to play with, I'm interested in something else. The best and fullness of what my ancestors could not achieve." The dark cloud completely engulfed Darkrai. Only a pair of green eyes appeared through the thickness of smoke. The sound of bones snapping and twisting shifted in the darkness. Charles spread out his wings and, with a mighty clap, shot up into the sky. A giant dark beast lunged out of the black cloud and gripped onto the branch of a flaming pine tree. Jumping from branch to branch, it made its way to the top of the tree. Grabbing its final limb, it launched into the air towards Charles. A sudden mass of weight fell upon Charles, wrecking his flight pattern. The large beast, acting like a dead weight upon his back, sent Charles crashing onto the pathway at the skirt of the mountain. The dark beast jumped off him. Not wasting a moment, Charles got up with a flap of his wings and stood on both feet. Standing before him was a huge forest phantom, blocking his way from getting up the path to the mountain. Looking down at him with pale, lifeless green eyes, the phantom trailed saliva from its mouth, and the bridge of its nose wrinkled as he growled at the son of Leaping Bird. "You see, soaring eagle," said the phantom, "I have become stronger than any of my ancestors in the past. Not one of them can amount to the power that I have been given. Not one. You could have had this same power, but you chose something else." "I chose someone else more powerful than me, Darkrai," said Charles, "and his power, when it flows through me, is far greater than anyone can fully comprehend." Charles thrust out his palm towards Darkrai. A sudden intense jet stream of wind came down from the heavens, sending Darkrai off the ground and smashing into the mountain behind him. "A power far greater than you or me," continued Charles. Charles charged up the mountain trail past Darkrai, clapping his wings to help boost his agility. "Here!" shouted Nathaniel. He grabbed Virginia's hand, stopping her from running further down the path. "Here! This is it!" Virginia came to a halt. She turned around and saw Nathaniel pointing up at a flight of stairs that ran up the side of the mountain at a 75-degree angle. "Wait, can't we just keep running around this path?" "No," said Nathaniel. "This path dead ends in 100 yards. This is the only other route. It will lead us straight up to the top." "Oh, this is too high. You're sure there's no other way?" "Not one. This is it." Nathaniel placed his hand upon her back and pressed her towards the stairs. "If you would like, either Tristan or I would be happy to climb first to help guide you." Uriah landed on Tristan's shoulder and began to whisper into his ear. "Either way, we need to move now," said Tristan. "They're almost here." "What?" asked Virginia. "The fire?" "No," said Tristan. "The ones coming with the fire." A loud shriek, followed by a pack of howling wolves, sounded over the edge of the cliff and down the path from where they had come. Tristan drew an arrow from his quiver and attached it to the string of his bow. Uriah flew off his shoulder, down the path and then over the cliff's edge. "Go!" shouted Tristan. "Now!" Nathaniel started up the stairs. "Virginia, come, like this!" He placed his hands on either side of the rocky walls and climbed the stairs. Virginia took her first step up the stairs. She placed her hands on the cold stone steps and felt it turn warm. Her back and hair felt hot. She turned around and saw the flames from the forest fire now making their way up over the cliff's edge like a wall of fire. The shriek of a ghost cried out, and over the edge of the mountain came several roots, whipping onto the rocks of the mountainside around Virginia. Her heart shrank as another flaming tree crawled over the cliff's edge, its branches blazing hot with dark fire. It gave a loud cry at the sight of Virginia. Instantly, it slung out one of its roots, trying to grab her around the waist. Before it could reach her, an arrow shot straight through the creature's tentacle. The tree cried out and drew its root back. "Virginia, climb!" shouted Tristan. With new adrenaline running through her system, Virginia rapidly climbed the stairs. "Go, Nathaniel! I'm right behind you!" 3 wolf howls cried out over the edge of the path. A large forest phantom crawled over the edge of the cliff. Even though its body was on fire, it did not blister or burn. It looked down at Tristan with its green eyes. Through the whipping tongues of fire rising around its face, a deadly grin followed by a growl released a vapor of sulfur from behind its teeth. Tristan smiled and drew an arrow. "Make a move, Fluffy," he said, attaching the arrow to his bow. The beast roared at him, barking ash out of its mouth. The fire demon charged at him. Tristan knelt and released the arrow. The beast fell dead with an arrow penetrating under its jaw and through the top of its head. 2 more wolf cries came down the path to Tristan's left. He turned and saw that the fire had already crossed over the trail and was inching closer, like a moving wall. 2 flaming phantoms lunged out of the fires and ran down the path toward him. With every breath they took, sulfur and ash trailed out of their nostrils, and black smoke trailed behind them like a thick, dark cloud. Uriah flew in front of Tristan. "I gotcha," said Tristan. Taking 2 arrows out of his quiver, he attached them parallel to each other on his bow. Uriah flew down, landing on his bow. Both phantoms began to charge harder. The green in their eyes craved the blood of their prey. Uriah would not fly off the bow, and Tristan stood there patiently. The beasts were 50 feet from the archer, yet Uriah did not move. Tristan knelt on one knee, never taking his eyes off the monsters coming his way. The forest phantoms made it 25 feet away. 20, 15, 10. Uriah lifted off the bow. Tristan lifted it and released both arrows simultaneously. Both demons whimpered in pain and fell to the ground dead, sliding along the earth and stopping at Tristan's feet, each with an arrow through its skull. "Anyone else?" shouted Tristan. Uriah flew behind him and began pulling against the braid behind his ear, beckoning him to climb the stairs. What is it? Uriah released his hair and flew across his face. Tristan followed his movement, but stopped as something down the path caught his attention. Out of the wall of fire stepped a woman in a red dress. The fire swirled around her like a dirt devil. Flame consumed her eyes. Her long brown hair whipped with the current of the fires that spun around her. She held an angry, focused look on her face as she glared at Tristan and rested her hand upon the hilt of her sword. All his humor left him at that moment as Tristan fixed his eyes on the woman. His face became straight, and his attention sharp as they stared at each other. He slowly reached back for one of his arrows, but Uriah caught his index finger before he removed one. Flapping his wings aggressively, he pulled Tristan's hand towards the stairs. Tristan fell upon the rock steps beneath him and looked up at the bird flying toward Virginia and Nathaniel. He gave one last glance at the woman. More wolves barked from within the flames behind her. Out of the wall of fire leaped an entire score of flaming forest phantoms. Half began climbing on the mountainside, while the other half charged down the path towards him. Tristan darted up the path, hoping to reach Virginia's feet before the phantoms. Charles ran faster than he ever had before. His wings flapped overhead, still giving him the extra boost he needed. He ran down the mountain path, hoping to catch up with the others before it was too late. He spread his wings out and dug his feet into the ground. Hope left his heart. The gravel pathway in front of him, and the lower and upper side of the mountain around it, was completely devoured in a thick, dark fire. "Virginia!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Virginia! Nathaniel! Tristan!" A loud bark came from behind. Charles became sharp and alert. With a mighty flap of his wings, he jumped into the air and did a backflip. A giant beast lunged straight underneath him and fell into the fires. Charles landed on both feet, took a couple of steps back from the fires, and held his sword ready in both hands. A pair of green eyes appeared in the darkness of the flames and glared at him. Out of the fires walked Darkrai on all fours. The dark fires blazed over his fur and billowed into a smokestack above him. "I told you this would happen, Soaring Eagle," said Darkrai. "All you had to do was surrender the girl and you and your friends would go free. Now they all lie in ash because you were too foolish not to surrender. I'm beginning to wonder if it would be better to leave you here alive to suffer with your pain, or kill you myself." Tristan released another arrow. It flew like a whistling bird before penetrating the side of a werewolf climbing from down below. He turned around on his stomach and continued to climb. Virginia's feet were just inches above his head. "Nathaniel," he shouted, "climb faster." "I'm trying," Nathaniel shouted back. "Try faster." "I'm trying. I never had to make this climb under pressure, and neither have you now that I recall it." "Yeah, well, I'm finding I have a bit more of a pressing incentive this time." Virginia's arms burned, and her legs began to shake in pain. "Nathaniel, how far away are we from the top?" "Not far," he responded. "About 50 more feet to go." 50 more feet to go. Just 50 more feet to go, and then we can... "Tristan!" Tristan looked over and saw a phantom climbing along the right side of the stairs of the mountain, closing in on them. Quickly, he pulled out an arrow, drew it back in his bow, and launched it. The wolf cried out in pain and rolled down the mountainside with an arrow between its ribs. "The other side!" shouted Virginia. "They're climbing on the other side, too!" Tristan looked to his left and saw more wolves climbing up, making their way toward them. He drew an arrow and began to pick them off the rocky wall, dropping one with every shot. "Virginia, keep climbing," ordered Tristan. "I've got this." Through the tears and the pain, Virginia continued to climb the stairs as a new strength empowered her to continue. Tristan turned around on his back and braced his feet against the sides of the stone stairs. Uriah began to fly below him in sweeping motions from left to right. Tristan followed his marker and launched arrows at the wolves chosen by the dove. "We are here, Virginia," said Nathaniel, looking down at her. "Look." Virginia's arms were covered in a cold, damp sweat with the mountain air. Her body grew tired from climbing and running, but she looked up and saw the end of the stairs, which ended at a plateau at the top of the mountain. Her tired eyes shot open as she let out a blood-curdling scream. Nathaniel turned his head back up the stairs and made eye contact with a pair of green eyes looking down at him from a long black snout. The wolf began to growl at him, breathing large puffs of sulfur into Nathaniel's face. The beast gave a loud bark and opened its jaws wide to strike. A faint whistle sounded from below. The tickling of a feather brushed past Nathaniel's earlobe. A second later, the wolf fell over dead with an arrow running through its mouth. Nathaniel grabbed his ear and pulled his fingertips around for an examination. No blood. He looked down at Tristan, who was aiming his bow up toward them. "Are you insane?" Nathaniel shouted at him. "You could have killed me." "Oh, come on," Tristan shouted back. "When have I ever missed?" Nathaniel shook his head and climbed over the edge of the last stair and onto the plateau. Pushing the corpse of the dead wolf out of the way, he turned around and held out his hand for Virginia. Virginia looked up and saw the hand offered to her. She reached up and took it. With a firm tug, Nathaniel hoisted her up onto the mountaintop. She looked around and fell to the ground, happy to finally reach the top. Tristan continued to fire arrows at the advancing wave of giant werewolves rushing up the sides of the mountain. Uriah stopped marking targets below and flew up towards Tristan. Grabbing Tristan by his hair, Uriah urged him to continue climbing. Tristan saw more wolves coming within his sight. "But can't I just hit a few more?" he asked. Uriah kept tugging at his hair. Terrible screeches sounded from below. Tristan looked down and saw several fiery trees climbing up the sides of the mountains with their roots like a swarm of octopuses. More phantoms rushed past the trees, trailing ash and smoke behind them as they charged up the rocky wall. The flames advanced along the sides of the mountain. A tall twister of dark, spinning fire began to climb the stairs below him. Quickly, Tristan turned on his stomach and climbed up the stairs. The forest phantoms advanced and began to pass him on either side. The fires below crawled up the mountain faster, with a fiery twister steadily blazing up the stairs. Charles held his sword in his hands, his face flushed with anger. The light in his wings began to dim. A thought ran through his mind. He looked Darkcry in the eyes. If they are only piles of ash right now, then why do the flames continue to advance up the side of the mountain? Why haven't they stopped? In fact, why are you still here? Darkcry growled and slowly walked towards Charles. "It is impossible to know either way now, isn't it? How will you know that they've reached the top?" Tristan climbed over the last step and rolled onto the plateau. "I don't like that climb. I don't like it, I tell you." Nathaniel reached down and picked his friend up off the ground. "We are going to talk about that shot you made later." "Oh, I figured," said Tristan, drawing another arrow and fastening it to his bowstring. "But for now, I believe more pressing matters are at stake." He quickly launched the arrow, sending it right past Nathaniel's waist. Nathaniel turned around and saw a forest phantom falling off the plateau's edge in the distance, with Tristan's arrow lodged in its throat. "They've advanced all along the sides of the mountain," said Tristan. "Be watching for them in every direction." Nathaniel picked up his hammer and held it with both hands. "Tristan, sound the trumpet." "Now." "What for?" Nathaniel took one of the satchels off him and passed it to Tristan. "I told Soaring Eagle we would once we reached the top." "Oh, why didn't you say so?" Tristan reached into the satchel and pulled out the small ram's horn. Pressing it to his lips, he sounded 2 loud blasts. 2 blasts of a trumpet sounded down in the valley below. Charles held up his index finger. "That's how I know." Darkcry lowered his ears and cried out in anguish at the sound of the trumpet. Charles jumped off the cliff's edge and spread his wings out wide. Catching a gust of wind, he flew over the forest fire below and began to climb higher with every stroke of his wings. Nathaniel reached down and picked up Virginia by the arm. "Come on, Virginia. We have to get to the bridge." Weak and exhausted, Virginia mustered all the remaining strength she had to stand. "Where is it?" Tristan pointed his bow to the west. "Right there." Virginia looked ahead. About 150 yards away, on the far side of the plateau, was a long rock that stretched out like a tongue over the Great Canyon, with a rope bridge with wooden planks for footing clinging to its end. She looked at Nathaniel and Tristan. "You're kidding me, right? That's it?" I know, said Nathaniel. I didn't trust it either the first time, but it's the only way to cross to the other side. Though it may shake just a little, it has held strong for generations. Generations? Hold on! How old is it? Loud shrieks sounded behind them over the edge. Virginia turned around and saw black smoke billowing from the stairs. A cold sweat began to run down her face. Her heart started racing again. She looked at the old bridge swaying in the wind over the Great Canyon. This is it. This is what I climbed all this way for. She ran fast towards the bridge. Tristan and Nathaniel ran beside her. You sure do put your fears aside fast, said Tristan. If I take the bridge, I have a better chance of living. But if I stay here, I'm dead for sure, said Virginia. What choice do I have? Tristan chuckled. Good point. The mountain air made her sweat cold, and each breath she took burned in her lungs. Her energy was near expired, and the thought of the devils catching up to her numbed her confidence to stride. Yet with every step she made towards that old bridge, excitement began to spread through her veins evermore. Her eyes widened, and hope sprung within her spirit like water upon dry land. Her feet hit the stone tongue. The wind blew against her, the closer she got to the edge. Virginia, look out, shouted Nathaniel. Virginia looked down and saw two fiery wolves climbing below on either side of the stone lip. Both creatures lunged from their waiting positions into the air at her. A strong hand grabbed her cloak from behind. Virginia was pulled off her feet and thrown back onto the grassy plateau beside Tristan and Nathaniel, just before two massive jaws came within inches of striking her throat. Nathaniel let out a battle cry and swung his hammer in an uppercut stroke, smashing underneath the werewolf's jaw on the left. Tristan fired an arrow into the one on the right. Both animals fell off the edge, down into the misty canyon below. Tristan, Nathaniel, and Virginia all turned toward the stairs and saw many flaming trees making their way over the cliff's edge with a score of flaming wolves. The flames of the wall of fire had risen over the edge of the mountain top. All the creatures looked at the three that stood near the bridge. Virginia stared at each of the wolves, while they locked their eyes on her, drooling in hunger and growling in frustration. All the trees seemed to screech her name, like haunting ghosts. What do we do now? She asked. Nathaniel readied his hammer and stood strong, preparing himself for the fight about to come his way. Tristan attached his bow to the quiver behind his back and drew his sword. He looked at his reflection in its blade and smiled. We don't lose heart, Tristan said, stepping back into a fighting stance. Virginia stood up in the middle of her two friends. I don't know how to fight. For now, just use that dagger, said Tristan. It will never lose its edge, and it will cut through anything. Timidly, Virginia drew her dagger. I'm scared. Nathaniel placed his hand on her shoulder. A real friend rushes quickly to lay down his life in protection of his friend's life, Virginia. We won't abandon you up here alone. Virginia smiled at Nathaniel and looked over at Tristan, who nodded in agreement to Nathaniel's words. The wolves began to growl louder and bark viciously. The trees burning with a dark red fire began groaning and shrieking louder. The wolves started walking towards Virginia, and the trees began to crawl with their roots. A light gust of wind began to blow upon the backs of Tristan, Nathaniel, and Virginia, and brush against the leaves of the stagnant trees that had grown on top of the plateau of the mountain. All of the oak trees and the pines, not consumed by the dark fire, began to move from side to side, waking out of their slumber. Tristan and Nathaniel looked at the trees that started to move, and then at each other, with a smile. What's happening to the trees around us? Asked Virginia. Are they waking up? Asked Nathaniel. Only one way to find out, said Tristan. Attack? Asked Nathaniel. Attack! Shouted Tristan. Wielding their toys in the air, both boys ran toward the demons, like shouting, terrifying barbarians. The wolves ran out to meet them in the middle of the plateau. Both parties met in the middle, like two waves about to collide. As they drew to the center, two wolves leaped midair towards Nathaniel. The trees without dark fire beside Nathaniel began to groan loudly. Instantly, multiple roots sprung up from the grassy earth and grabbed the front paws of the two beasts, dragging them down to the ground. Nathaniel took his hammer and gave two powerful swings like a golf club, sending both wolves flying through the fiery wall and back over the cliff's edge like two smoke bombs. Two wolves charged at Tristan. Uriah gave a loud cry, louder than a hawk or eagle. Both phantoms looked up and saw the dove flying directly at them from behind Tristan. Instantaneously, a bright light from within the bird flashed like an explosion of fire. Both beasts became blind. The last thing they saw was Tristan swinging a killing stroke at each of them. Both flaming dogs fell dead to the ground in a pile of smoldering ash. While the rest continued to dance and fight around Tristan and Nathaniel, one wolf ran through the fight straight toward Virginia. Horror ran through her eyes as the wolf the size of a bull sprinted head-on at her. A root shot out of the ground, snagging the phantom's right front paw. It lost balance and came tumbling at Virginia like a bowling ball. Just in time, Virginia jumped out of the way before the monster almost knocked into her like a pin. The creature stopped rolling beside her. Both made eye contact. The beast growled at her and jumped into the air, landing on top and pinning her to the ground. Virginia screamed. The wolf's saliva trailed out of its mouth and dripped down upon her face as it growled and showed its teeth, its jaws open, ready to clamp down on her throat. Virginia shouted angrily and plunged her dagger deep into the monster's ribcage. The dog let out a loud whimper and fell over dead, bleeding black blood before its fires died out, leaving the wolf's corpse smoking on the ground. Virginia scurried to her feet, panting hard. She looked down at the body of the slain wolf. She held the dagger out before her, gazing at her reflection in its blade. "I did it?" A loud bark was heard behind her. Virginia turned around and saw 3 more phantoms rise out of the fires over the edge of the cliff. The trees tried to advance toward her, but Nathaniel and Tristan fought hard. With his big hammer, Nathaniel clubbed and sent any beast that came his way flying over the edge. With mighty strokes, he smashed his club into the trunks of the flaming trees, breaking them in half. The shattered, fiery trees collapsed into 2 pieces and burned like bonfires upon the ground. Tristan followed Uriah's lead. The light of the dove would flash like lightning in the face of all his foes. With graceful jumps and flips, spinning and twirling his blade through the air, Tristan would strike his blade upon the blinded beast that tried to attack him. He was untouchable. Following the guidance of Uriah, he jumped over phantoms with corkscrews and somersaults, slicing the wolves in his mid-rotation like a ninja. It was as if he flew with the dove like a dance as they jumped and soared around each other. 6 trees with dark fire remained and began to flock to Virginia. The trees that were waking up began to moan and growl. As the dirt around their trunks began to loosen, their roots sprung up from the earth. They crawled out of where they once were to meet the enemies of Cohen out on the battlefield. The flaming oak and the awakened oak collided in the middle of the field. With their roots, the trees rich with life began to grab and crawl up the trunks of the trees of dark fire until they fell upon them, crushing them into the dirt. The fire of the ones knocked to the ground could not burn the trees of the mountaintop, for the life inside of them was too rich. Like anacondas gripping their prey, the trees grabbed the fiery ones' trunks and branches with their roots and began to choke them, breaking and snapping in their deathly grip. With their branches, they swayed back and forth like large fans until the dark fire began to die away, leaving the flaming trees into nothing but smoldering piles on the ground. Virginia looked around at the battle. Most of the werewolves who tried to attack Tristan or Nathaniel were slain. All the darkly burning trees that had once seemed horrific fell under the strength of the trees of the mountaintop. Hope kindled inside of her. "We're gonna make it." Far in the distance, beyond the battle scene, rose a strand of dark fire that whirled like a dirt devil aflame near the stairs. Making her way over the final step was a woman in a red dress with flames spiraling around her like a twister. Although she was in a different wardrobe, Virginia recognized the woman's eyes the moment she stepped over the mountain's edge. They were the same eyes that had cunningly looked upon her back at Mason High, and now they fixed on Virginia again. The woman smiled as the cat finally found its prey. She slowly walked towards Virginia, and as she did, the wall of fire followed behind her over the mountain's edge. "Hello, Virginia," said the woman. "Or should I call you Cohen?" How does she know my real name? "Who are you?" The woman raised her left hand, aiming her palm at Virginia. She took a deep breath and let it out with a smile. Tristan flipped over a wolf, landed beside it, and thrust his sword through the creature's side. As soon as the beast fell out of the way, he saw the woman lifting her hand towards Virginia. He sheathed his sword and drew his bow out from behind him. "Nathaniel!" he shouted. Nathaniel smashed his hammer into a giant flaming tree, sending it falling over the edge in 2 splintering pieces. He turned his head and saw the woman holding her hand at Virginia in the distance. His heart sank. "No!" he cried. From the tip of her fingers to her shoulder, the woman's skin turned charcoal black. and shriveled like a prune around her bones. A dark, glowing flame began to wrap down her arm like ivy, stretching to her palm. Her hand began to glow red with a dark flame. "Long live Cohen," mocked Aniatha. Like from the mouth of a dragon, fire blasted out of her hand and ripped across the plateau in Virginia's direction. Virginia had no time to move, no time to think, and only a few seconds to see what was happening. She froze like a deer in headlights as the blast of fire rushed across the ground, soon to engulf her in its path.
This is the end of Chapter 18. Tune in next Thursday for Chapter 19. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter ad-free ahead of everyone else, then subscribe to Early Access and tune in on Sunday. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. It really helps the show. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcasting platforms. What Shines with the Dawn was written and created by C. Taylor Eason. Copyright Christian Taylor Eason, 2024.